All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to One Soccer. I'm your host for today, Josh Deming, joined by my colleague, Alex Gonge-Ruzic. And today we are doing a reaction stream to the Canadian national team September international window roster. Today's stream is, as always, as I just get it up here because it is not there, our overlay is sponsored by tonybet. So a big shout out to them for sponsoring today's stream. So, Alex, the September international window is coming up. We are taking on the United States, Mexico. You have to imagine that Jesse Marsch has his eye on that United States match. And I think it's fair to say that this roster kind of shows that. I mean, I know that there's a few injuries with some big players like Buchanan and Kone, but honestly, this is a pretty close to perfect roster, I think, with the two surprise players in Stefan Afrifa and Niko Sigur. So what's your initial reaction to the roster?
Yeah, I think pretty straightforward. I think this pretty much ticks about almost every box I guess you'd expect to see from a friendly camp. Like you see familiarity, tick that off. You got all your most of your big guns there. Of course, Ismail Kone misses out with a knock, so that's obviously disappointing because you'd like to see him there. But it's a friendly camp. You let him rehab with Marseille. He's obviously got his eyes on making his debut there. Tajon Buchanan remains out. That's fine. We know he's got his injury. But then you also bring in some of the guys who really did well at Copa America, right? Like you reward a Tenny Oluwaseyi, you reward, Ali Ahmed, Mathieu Schwaner, some of those guys who did well. But then you also bring in a couple dual nationals. Of course, you have to remember Sigur. I mean, he filed this switch, so you don't have to worry on that regard. It was official or made official by Canada Soccer in this squad release that Sigur has indeed filed a switch. Like he's part of Canada going forward. But then if Stephen Afrifa, he can represent Ghana, which you never know. Those options are there. So you bring in a couple dual nationals. Really, the only thing I was kind of surprised to see that the squad was only 23. They cut it down from 26 at Copa America. So they took out 7 guys to make up for the 4 new faces they brought in. But I thought most of the decisions made a lot of sense, and there weren't really any, or at least, nothing really too egregious in terms of absences. I know a few were mentioned, like Ike Ugbo. Not too surprised at the sense, like he hasn't had the chance to really get going yet with Sheffield Wednesday. And obviously there's maybe the reality where he's still not ready to come into the squad after pulling out of Copa America. And other than that, I think most of the decisions were pretty straightforward, right, Josh?
Yeah, I definitely agree. If you guys are joining us in the stream today, be sure to drop a like, say hello, let us know how you rate this roster out of 10. And yeah, Alex, I 100% agree. We'll start with a few players before we really dive into who is there. We'll start with some who are not there, beginning with Ike Ugbo. Now, I put out a predicted squad, and I didn't have Ugbo in it. Alex, I'm not sure if you did a predicted squad and you didn't. I didn't have him in for a couple reasons. Is one, I wasn't sure if he wanted to, if he was up for it. And even if he was, I don't know if it's a great look. Like I don't have the entire story as to why he decided not to go to Copa America, so I don't think it's fair to, without fully understanding the story, to kind of give an opinion on it. But from what I know, it seems like he just, didn't want to be there. So I didn't feel right about bringing him back into the very next window. I think he should have a Canadian international future if he wants to be a part of this side. Jesse Marsch said, the door is not closed. I don't know. I don't think I would have brought him in for this one, despite, honestly, that I want to. I really rate Ike Ugbo. Another one is Jason Russell-Rowe. You got to feel for the guy. I mean, he just won Leagues Cup. He scored in that final. He's a big game player, and I think at a young age he's really starting to show that. But Alex and I recently had a conversation off of camera, and we were talking about really the striker depth chart. And Alex, I think we named about 10 or so strikers. So it's very competitive. And with this 23-player squad, they only brought 4 strikers. It's David, Larin, Oluwaseyi, and Theo Bair. And it's hard to argue, who would you drop to get in a Jason Russell-Rowe or even Ike Ugbo if he wanted to be there. So there's also a couple of other dual nationals. Promise David, I've seen some of you guys mention. Luka Kalinovic. We have Charles Andreas Brim, who was not included. So, Alex, I guess starting with the strikers, who do you feel the most? Who do you feel for the most out of the strikers who was left off this list?
I'd say Jason Russell-Rowe. I think is probably the big one. Just because, Promise David, of course, it'd be nice, but also, I think that's one where there's no rush there. At least you feel, right? Like just he can continue to find his feet over in Belgium, and maybe he's one you look at in October or November, right? Like he's someone where he's very new to this whole trajectory. He just made that move to Belgium, And like you mentioned, the striker depth is so big, so I'm not sitting there thinking too much about what promise David could bring. Jason Russell is definitely one because he's been in there. His performances have been good for Canada. So yeah, I think you wonder if he could get more of a look. I think what's worth noting on the flip side is that because Columbus have played so many games with Champions Cup, Leagues Cup, they have a bunch of fixtures to make up and they're actually playing during the international window. So I also wonder if that's one of those cases where it's like, look, you can come be the fifth, sixth, seventh guy in an already loaded striker group, or you can stay with Columbus, get some minutes. They'll be missing some guys due to international duty. I do wonder if that's the sort of situation there. So I kind of feel less bad if that ends up being the case. If Russell Rose starts, they're supposed to play Seattle the same day that Canada plays the U.S. So we'll keep an eye on that. And I think it opens up the door for a guy like Afrifa to come in. I mean, Afrifa is a bit of an interesting one, right? A bit of a later bloomer, 23, and it's just his second pro season. But I thought he's been having a pretty darn good year. He's really found his feet lately. And the big advantage that Afrifa might have going forward is he's been playing mostly as a winger this year. Naturally, he's a striker. He essentially can play anywhere across the front line. He's playing left wing and right wing this year for Kansas. We know he's a striker. And he's producing at a rate more prolific than, say, a Jacob Schaffenberg. I just use that as an example. Jacob Schaffenberg obviously has carved out a big role for this Canadian men's national team and won't be leaving the squad anytime soon. Just for context, Afrifa is producing at a more prolific rate than that on a similarly bad team, because Kansas hasn't been the greatest this year, neither is Nashville. Like, Afrifa is a bit of an interesting one. Yeah, he's a bit older, but 23 is not old, say. And I think, the fact that he's so versatile, it's worth having a look at it.
I think so too. I mean, I was surprised. I think, Alex, you and I, again, off of camera, recently talked about Afrifa and just kind of said that he's having a very underrated and overlooked season. So it is a bit of a surprise, and it's also worth noting that Afrifa beat out some players in Europe. I mean, there's Jay Nelson, there's Theo Corbiano, even some back home like Ryan Raposo, always a player that I was wondered if he ever going to kind of get a look. So I don't mind it. Also, Junior Hoylett, worth noting, left off of this list as well. So we do have some solid depth on the wide areas, and this is a player who has maybe gone a little under the radar, having a solid season in MLS and is getting rewarded for it. So we're going to do it here. We're going to move over to a lineup builder, Alex, and we can kind of put the players in a certain position. But the way that this team looks to me is like a 4-4-2, given that there's 4 strikers. It seems like there's 2 players at every position plus the 3 keepers, so we can have a little bit of fun in a bit, Alex, just kind of putting the players where we think that they will go. But I do want to go over to one of the big stories, maybe not as big because, it was leaked for a little bit in Niko Sigur, but no Ismail Kone here, obviously, as we mentioned, is a big loss, but Niko Sigur is here. Now, Jesse Marsch is going to speak to the media at 1 p.m. Eastern time, so we can ask him some questions there. A couple questions that come to mind for myself will be, as Kyle asked here, what happened with Santiago Lopez? I don't know 100% know. I'm thinking there might be a chance that he is there as a training player. That was what the report said when there was the window with the Netherlands and France. I don't believe Zwiderski was put on the roster. Alex, maybe you can correct me, but I believe he was there. So similar to this, just because he's not on the 23-man roster doesn't mean that Santiago Lopez is there. Now, I can't confirm if he isn't or not, but we can ask Marsch about it later. And the other one is Niko Sigur. Alex, there was reports that he is nursing an injury. Cloak put out a report saying that he, in one way, shape, or form, would be included in the September window. Doesn't necessarily mean that he will play. And they kind of circled that Panama match maybe for his debut. Maybe the injury is better than they thought. Maybe there is a chance. I don't 100% know. But what do you make of it, the fact that he is in this 23-player roster? Do you think that there's a chance we could see him, or we just got to wait to see what Jesse Marsch says?
Yeah, I feel like you will see him. I guess the reality is we just haven't heard all too much about what injury it is. We've just heard a lot he's injured. We don't know if it's, a hand, an arm, a shoulder, a knee, a groin, right, a foot. Depending on what it is, it makes a big difference, because if he's nursing like a groin or a foot, you're like, all right, you don't really want to see him, but who knows? Maybe it's something a little more minor. I'd say it's just good to have him around the group. I guess you do wonder that since it's only 23, that if he isn't available, if you've been better off bringing another player than having Sigur around anyway. So that's why I feel like the fact that he's in it and it's a 23-player squad, I feel like the indicators are there that he should be able to be involved, even if it's 15, 20, which again, you don't mind. As was mentioned, again, of course, as we knew last week, Croatia officially said, like, look, he's leaving, he's filing his switch, yada, yada, yada. Technically, we didn't know much else other than that. But just to reiterate, because it was written in the Canada Soccer statement, just for those who might have missed it, they said Niko Sigur recently committed to Canada through a FIFA-approved one-time switch. So that's there in writing from the Canadian Soccer Federation. He's filed his switch. I guess you may as well get him around the group as early as you can. As he's a bright, prospect with a bright future, but he's also someone that can help right away. And even if it's 5-10 right away, you take that.
Yeah, absolutely. And as the Niko Sigur comes in, that kind of means that Samuel Piette was left out. Alex, again, we've talked about the fact that he got 0 minutes at Copa America, 2 major tournaments with 0 minutes as well. What do you think this means for Samuel Piette now that a player like Niko Sigur is coming in? Because I do think recruiting a dual national like this, and I put this out there, and if you think that he chose Canada because of minutes, so be it. Maybe he chose it for his heart. Regardless, the Croatian media was disappointed and wished Sigur luck that he made the switch to Canada because he is a promising young talent. And we went toe-to-toe with a top nation like Croatia, and we got this player in. It comes at a perfect time. Our midfield depth, especially at the 6th position, isn't great. And a player like Samuel Piette seemed to not really be trusted by Jesse Marsch. And now, just like that, whether Sigur's fully fit or not, he's included over Samuel Piette. So, I mean, it might be tough, Alex, but do you think that, Piette stays with the national team or maybe kind of running out?
I don't say running out. I just think it's just natural, right? In the sense that now especially with the call of Niko Sigur, and it's been that way for a while. Like Piette's been on the kind of edges of the midfield. He didn't play at Copa America. You look at who's there. If healthy, of course, Kone, Eustachio, Ahmed, Schwaner are all ahead of him in the pecking order, and Osorio. So that's 5. Now you add in Sigur with 6. Typically, Canada has been one to call up 6, 7 midfielders. Like Piette's right at the bottom of that list, and most of it's not due to his fault, right? It's just the reality that Eustachio is at his position. Normally, he's hoovering up minutes. Now you imagine if Sigur comes in, the same thing. The reality is, I think this reflects kind of where Piette's at in this group, where that if you go a bit experimental, if you bring in some new faces, that he could very well miss out. But I could also see a reality where in October and November, he has a good run with Montreal and he's right back in. But he's kind of, you're not looking at him as someone who's going to be breaking into that first 11 right now. And I guess that's just kind of the nature of the depth around him.
I think that's fair. We're going to get in a couple comments here, guys, and then I'm going to bring up the little lineup builder, and we'll show you kind of where each player slots in. Like I mentioned, there's 23. There's basically 2 players at every position in a 4-4-2 system, and then the 3 keepers. So we'll have a nice little visual for you guys, and we'll talk about each player as we bring them up. But I want to get into some comments here. So if you have anything you want to ask us about the roster, feel free. We've touched on a few things, so if we see any, similar questions, we'll touch on them very quickly. There's a good one here. Honestly, it's a friendly window. I would have loved to see a little bit more rotation. And I mentioned that right off the top of the stream is I know it's a friendly window, and I tend to agree with you. I think the best of both worlds would have been bringing like 26 players because then you could have seen some other faces. I was a little surprised by that. Doesn't mean, I guess, maybe like a Santiago Lopez could be included. But regardless, yeah, I would like to see the 26 and bring in some new faces. But I do think that this is a window, despite being friendlies, that Jesse Marsch, I think, wants to win. I mean, these are the 3 co-hosts for the 2026 World Cup, 3 of the top CONCACAF dogs. And I don't know, man. I'm excited for that U.S. match because I think Jesse Marsch is excited about it as well. I think he wants to go in. I think this roster is very strong. I don't know like what real changes you could argue that you can make to make this squad better, given that, we had some injuries. So I get what you're saying. I think I tend to agree where if he would have took 26, then we could have maybe brought in a few interesting players. Like maybe like we talked about Promise David. Maybe, I mean, Luc de Fougerolles is another one, Alex, that I'm a little surprised isn't in this team considering we brought him to a Copa America. Our 4 center backs is Bombito, Cornelius, Waterman, and Kamal Miller, which means de Fougerolles misses out. What do you think the reasoning is behind that? Just trying to get some reps with his club, maybe find a loan move somewhere. Anything that sticks out as to why Luke missed out?
Yeah, I think for Luke, the Fuge role, that probably makes the most sense, right? It's that there's already 4 CBs that, Canada's kind of, provisionally capped him for a long time. And he's now at a point of his development where if he wants to get regular Canada call-ups, just got to get regular minutes. So I think it's also one where, he's kind of had his first look, right? Like he's been in the group, he's been around now. It's that next step of you've kind of gotten that first glance. And in terms of the friendly point, one thing I do want to point out, while I'd say certainly, of course, Jesse Marsh will want to win, although I don't know how much he'll want to beat an interim head coach of the U.S. He's probably sitting there a bit disappointed that Greg Berhalter is no longer there and that Mauricio Pochettino hasn't been brought in yet. I think you also have to remember, this is Jesse Marsh's, essentially, I'll say, it's his second full camp with the team. It's technically his third because he had 2 this summer, even though they were kind of overlapping. You didn't really get much time between them. The reality is Jesse Marsh needs to also continue to get used to some of these guys, right? Like he's worked with a bunch of them. He's still building chemistry. He's still figuring out what his best 11 is, right? Like that's why obviously during the Copa America, he didn't rotate too much because he was kind of like, all right, I'm new. I kind of have these guys that are there. Let's just put them in. And then slowly guys start to win his trust, right? Jacob Schaffelberg was one of them. Jonathan Osorio. And then by the last game, a bunch of guys stepped up. He's probably thinking, like, I just need to get a better look at these guys. Because if you look at a lot of them who are at Copa America, he didn't get the full look at Mathieu Schwaner, at Ali Ahmed, at Tani Oluwasi, Theo Bair, all of them. He got good looks at them off the bench, but he didn't get a chance to fully assess them. You also had Sam Adekugbe into that mix who could, you always have to remember, Adekugbe, if he starts, could always open up Alphonso Davies to play elsewhere on the pitch as an option. I think the reality you have to remember is that Jesse Marsh is still getting used to this squad. So while we see a lot of familiar faces and what they can bring, for Marsh, he's still working. Like who works best with who should play with who, what formation do I even use? And I think having a lot of those main guys around it makes sense to do so.
Yeah, I agree. I would like to think that. I mean, I don't know about you, Alex, but I feel like he will play a very strong his best 11 for the U.S. match. And then maybe for the Mexico match, then we'll see a Theo Bair, which there was a question earlier in the chat saying, will we see Theo get a fair shake at it here? Will we see maybe I don't know, I'm trying to think of who out of those players. So we did see them towards the end, but I don't know, I guess maybe Kamal Miller could be getting the start. Just basically the backups, I guess, will come in for the Mexico match. But we are going to build it right now to give you guys a nice little visual. But right before that, I'll just rapid fire a few questions here. Ike Ugbo would be a big talking point. What's going on? Don't 100% know. That'll definitely be mentioned at the press conference today with Jesse Marsh. My assumption, I mean, he didn't go to Copa America. Maybe Jesse didn't want to bring him back in right away. Maybe Ugbo didn't want to come back right away. He did just get the permanent move to Sheffield Wednesday. A lot of late moves for Ugbo over the years where he's got to start his season up a little bit late because the move didn't come in right when, training camp did. So maybe he's trying to establish himself. And that's what Jeff put here, probably trying to establish himself at Wednesday. We'll have to see, but definitely not the last we've seen of Ike Ugbo. Corbiano was an interesting one. I thought going down to the second division in Spain would be good for him just to hopefully get starting reps. Now, beginning the season, he is starting from the bench, which a little worrying. I think that there's just some other options of players that are playing, performing, and we've heard Jesse Marsh speak. He mentioned it with Eustachio, just because you're at a big club, or maybe just because you're in Europe, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a call up. You need to start, you need to perform. Afrifa is a good example of that. He's playing in Major League Soccer with Sporting, but he is starting. He's having a bit of a breakout season here, scoring goals. He scored a banger. I don't know if you guys saw that one, but that was a beauty. Got some attention as well. And then the final one before we get into the roster here isn't Sigur injured? The reports say he is nursing an injury. We will find out once we ask Jesse Marsh in about an hour or so to see kind of where he's at. It was always reported that he was going to be a part of this camp, though. So hopefully, maybe he got to manage his minutes. Maybe he can only go 30 minutes a match. We'll have to wait and see. And one final one. Has Ugbo played his last game for Canada? I don't think so.
Definitely not.
No.
I mean, again, I think this is probably just to touch on the Ugbo scenario. I think this was one where it's best for both parties for Marsh to just be like, look, just go do your thing. And for Ugbo, just to, again, focus on your club. I think for Marsh, it's he's going to want Ugbo to go out and score 10, 15 goals this year. And I think if you're Ugbo, you want that as well. You finally got a bit of club stability. You want to keep Wednesday up in the championship after the turbulent few years you had. I think there's definitely room for Ugbo to slot in. But as we mentioned, we have to remember the forward depth is extremely large. Unless you're David or Laren at the top, who've obviously built up a certain, cadre, a certain reputation. Because certainly Laren hasn't been firing. I know we saw that mentioned there by Kesha Bani, and it's something to watch, of course, at least in terms of Laren's starting place. The reality is, for all the other guys, you got to be informed, because there's so many that if you're not firing, you left a Jason Russell Rowe at home. There's a Promise David in terms of a dual national, right? There's a Luka Kalinovic in terms of a dual national. Like, there's guys who could step up right away. So I think also for Ugbo's benefit, just go out and score some goals.
Yeah, and hey, he's good doing that. He was a huge reason as to why Sheffield Wednesday stayed up last season. The fans loved him, wanted him back. I'm very excited for this move for him, because he's had a difficult last couple of years just trying to find somewhere stable, and going to a club where you help save relegation. That'll always make the fans love you, and they were very excited to see him back. So hopefully Ugbo can continue that form that he had laid on and push for maybe a call up in the next couple windows. But all right, Alex, I'm putting this in a 4-4-2 system just because the players that we've called up absolutely fit this. You'll see 2 players at each position, and then we can kind of talk about where they go, how they fit in. And technically, if you look at the starting 11, this could be a potential starting 11. So, Alex, we will build it as if this is the United States best 11. Jesse Marsh is going in. He wants that W, and this is the team he wants to go with. So I can't add the third keeper, but as you guys see, the 3 keepers will be Maxime Crépeau, Dane St. Clair, and Jonathan Sirois, which means that Tom McGill was left at home. I think that these are our 3 best keepers. Alex, I don't know if you would quickly want to touch on that decision, but I think it's the correct one.
I mean, for what you can do is you can go on subs and then just put like /Sirois.
There you go.
Adam, may as well, just so we don't forget about him.
Attaboy. No, that's smart. Okay, I'll do that. But yeah, so do you like the decision to leave?
Yeah, I think Crépeau for now continues to push, and I wonder what I wonder for this window is I legitimately see a St. Clair start against Mexico, right? Maybe you see Crépeau if you're going more of the first choice team, but give St. Clair a rep, right? Because he started against the Netherlands, he started against Uruguay. Clearly, Jesse Marsh is giving a look at him. Continue that, whereas Crépeau hasn't deserved to lose his place, but St. Clair's deserved to continue to get a look. I think finding that balance makes a lot of sense.
I agree. I don't think we'll probably see Sirois, but yeah, I can see it. Probably a start for each. Now moving along to the right back position, 2 very easy players to touch on. Alistair Johnston scored at the weekend. Big shout out to Alistair. He will be the starter, I assume, Alex, and which means his backup will be Richie Larea. Just like that. Very easy peasy. I mean, I'll rip through them and then we can touch them a little bit. The 4 center backs, the 2 right-sided center backs, starter will be Bombito, backup Waterman. For the left-sided, the 2 lefties, starter will be Cornelius, and then Kamal Miller. I don't know if you want to touch on anything there, you can, but otherwise we'll move over to the left back, where I'm going to slot in Davies, followed by Atakubi. What do you think? Do you think that we'll see Davies remain at left back because of the return of Atakubi? And I think you can touch on his fitness a little bit, maybe. Obviously, if he starts, it could push Alphonso Davies up to the left side. Maybe that then moves Schaffelberg somewhere else. We also have Liam Miller competing there. But if he stays at the left back position, then that keeps pretty much Sam off. I don't think there'll be a change in shape to try to find a way to get him on. So what are your thoughts there? Do you think that Atakubi will more so be like a 30-minute kind of player this window?
Yeah, Atakubi just said it needs to build up his fitness, and there's a reason why the Whitecaps have managed him so carefully. They want him to be anything close to 100% for the playoffs, for the Canadian Championship. Hopefully he can get a start tonight. That would be good for building up his confidence, but we'll see where he's at in that regard. I think the reality is the Davies, Cornelius, Bombito, Johnston back for work. There's some chemistry there. Build on that for now. And with Atakubi, he also he missed out the entire first 2 windows under Marsh, right? He's going to have some catch up to play in terms of the tactical identity, in terms of everything combined with this fitness. For now, he'll be a 15, 30, 45-minute guy who can come off the bench. Maybe later in the game you're trailing, you want to push Davies forward. Atakubi now can allow you to do that. You can obviously get flexibility with him. And then down the line, if Adekubi integrates well, gets up to full fitness, then I think you can start to have a deeper look at that sort of discussion of does he start? 'Cause just now it's too early, and even if you're looking at guys who could start, you could almost argue that putting a Larea at left back would make more sense just based on the strong Copa America that Larea had in terms of clawing his way into the lineup.
No, I think that's fair. And I think that's what most expected as well. Just wanted to give the viewers out there a little background on Adekubi, but it's still great to see him back in the squad here. Now we're going to move on to the midfielders. No Tajon Buchanan, no Junior Hoylett. The right side really opens up here, Alex. Afrifa comes in. I don't think he'll be walking into a starting 11, but I think this is a really good opportunity for Ali Ahmed to lock down that right-hand side. Those are the two players I had in mind there. Ali Ahmed being the starter, Afrifa being the backup. I really like Ahmed down the right-hand side. I noticed it, honestly, way back in Gold Cup. He's been doing it at club level. He's been doing it with the national team. I think he's the obvious choice there, right? Unless you wanted to maybe try to find Schwaner pushed over there, but I'm leaning towards Ali Ahmed.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess the one thing looking at this roster with Buchanan's injury, it is a bit light out wide, right? Where I'm looking at this, like there's Miller, Schaffelberg, Afrifa, and Ahmed you can throw into that mix. I do like the idea of Ahmed starting there, of course, especially in this case, because I think if you're going to play with, say they do go 4-2-2, Ahmed does give you a bit more flexibility. You can kind of tuck in. It frees up Davies, Johnston to push forward, right? It does make sense. So in this circumstance, for sure, although we have to eventually talk about the trump card that Jesse Marsch has in his pocket in the 4-2-3-1 and what it could mean going forward. But this scenario makes sense.
So long term with the national team, assuming we go to a 4-2-3-1 system, you'd rather see Ali Ahmed kind of tuck inside a bit and be one of those midfield three, or what do you think? Or is he kind of a wide player, like a backup, I guess, for Buchanan? Because I mean, assuming that Sigur's now there with Eustachio, and then you have Kone when he returns, plus you have a Mathieu Schwaner, and now Ali Ahmed, all of a sudden we have some pretty solid depth in and around that midfield.
Yeah, I think it just depends on the formation. I think if it's 4-2-2, yeah, then Ahmed really is getting penciled in as a winger. If it's 4-2-3-1, then Ahmed can obviously have flexibility where you can have him as a midfielder, but you can also kind of use him as one of the three midfield options. It just depends on, what Marsch kind of sees as the way going forward in terms of getting the most out of this team. But yeah, I like the idea of that in this formation. It's like go Stachio, Sigur backing up for now, right? Because you're not going to just drop Sigur into the starting 11 as much as we see the potential for that to work, and you see what it could bring long term. It's his first camp, and of course, that's without even getting to the injury considerations. So yeah, I think that kind of makes sense to go Stachio, Sigur as the 2 6s, and then from there, I guess with the question is, do you go Osorio or do you go Schwaner? Of course, Schwaner had the good cameo and probably is suited for a double, or more suited for the double pivot given his familiarity. But of course, Osorio and Eustachio is a pretty darn good pair, or solid pair at least, I'd say, Copa America. So I guess Osorio would probably be the preferred option to start.
Are we gonna say, if we're going off of what Jesse Marsch wants to do, I would tend to agree, although I think that Schwaner probably suits. I still think Jesse, I don't know. I was very surprised to see how well Osorio did in a 4-4-2 system. I don't know. I would rather see Schwaner start. I think that would just make a little bit more sense. Big shout out to Schwaner as well. Officially sealed his move to Grasshopper in the Swiss League, so he has left CF Montreal. He's left Major League Soccer. I'm torn there because I agree. I would like to see Schwaner start, although I kind of am leaning towards Osorio. So if we're going to do what Jesse Marsch is leaning, are you leaning towards that then, Alex? Obviously.
Well, I mean, right now, I think we're kind of building out his 4-2-2. Put Osorio, right? We'll adjust.
Okay.
We got time here.
All right. You spelled Osorio wrong. All right. Osorio, which means that Schwaner will be the backup. And then that leaves the left-hand side. It's a good battle there. We have Jacob Schaffelberg and Liam Miller, but I just,
based on the end of Copa, I feel like it's Schaffelberg, right? Just he kind of won that spot. But hey, as we know, we're excited about that Miller move to Hull City, and definitely feels like him building up a bit of confidence, bit of form at left wing there could easily throw him back in this mix.
Yeah, I put we had our little Canadians abroad predictions, and I said Liam Miller would have the most assists this season. He's off to a pretty solid start so far. But yeah, I mean, after Copa America, seeing Jacob Schaffelberg come off the bench and solidify himself as a solid super sub, people were nervous to see if he could do it from the beginning. I think when he started, he's looked really good as well. And I think Jesse Marsh right now is probably leaning towards Schaffelberg. Although it's worth saying that depending on what the game's asking for, I think Liam Miller's got a more well-rounded defensive side to his game than Jacob Schaffelberg. So I could see situations where Jesse Marsh would maybe want to start a Liam Miller, a bit of a pressing machine, can track back. We've seen him play as a wing back where Jacob Schaffelberg's just, energy, runs at the back line. So I could see it, but for right now, it's Schaff, and I don't think there's much to debate, which leaves the front two.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, Alex, it's going to be Jonathan David, Kyle Larin. Tanny's probably the next one up, and then Theo Baird. That's the big question mark from the chat, and I can pull up a bunch of different comments around Kyle Larin if he deserves a chance. Do you think there's any chance that we don't see him start one of these two games, at least probably the first one?
Again, I mean, it just depends what Jesse Marsh saw, because I mean, the reality is during Copa America for 5 games of Kyle Larin and Jonathan David, it was a bit of a slog, right? It was no goals against Argentina, a couple missed chances. Then Peru and Chile, as we know, is a bit of a grind, just 1 goal between those 2 games. If it comes from Jonathan David, then you come into the quarterfinals against Venezuela, and it's, again, just so many chances left on the table. Something just seemed off. And then Argentina, that was probably the worst showing of David and Larin cumulatively. They just looked off, out of sync, too easy to mark out of the game, completely. Canada had chances against Argentina in that semifinal to attack more than they did. And then finally in that 6th game, they go without David or Larin from the start, and Canada looks fluid. Canada looks free-flowing. They look so good in that 4-2-3-1. David comes off, finally leads the line on his own. What does he do? He scores. And, of course, he got a chance to play with Theo Baird. And even with Theo Baird, it just looks more natural. Again, I will continue to echo it until we see otherwise. Just David and Larin, it doesn't work because they're too similar. It's, again, I know we're used to seeing Kyle Larin, big target striker, especially. That's how Mallorca likes to use him. He's a guy who he's so similar to Jonathan David, and the reality is they just kind of get in each other's way. So I wonder if Jesse Marsh will have seen that, especially what they showed against Uruguay. The fact they scored 2 goals without starting their 2 all-time leading scores against a pretty much full-strength Uruguay defense. Like, food for thought there. And I think, again, we're putting Larin and David here because it's the depth chart, and usually the depth chart, you kind of put things based on how things have cracked out, right? That's why you got Osorio starting there, you got Larin starting there. But I think if you're looking at what Canada's best 11 is right now, that's where you're getting some interesting discussions.
And we will go there next, and I'll just rapid fire this off for you guys right now. Anyone who's joining the stream, say hello, give us your opinion on the roster drop that we just saw. We got Phil here saying that he would like to see Schwaner in there over Osorio, and I tend to agree. Alex and I just did our depth chart and kind of going off of what we think that Jesse Marsh will do. But we will build a 4-2-3-1 system because, Alex and I always do that. But looking at the team, this is how it kind of rounds out. The keepers, Crepeau, Dane Sinclair, and Jonathan Sirois. Right back, Johnston, Larea. Center backs, Bombito, Waterman, Cornelius, Miller. Left backs, and this is getting a bit of a debate where Davies fits in long term. I like him there at left back with Atakubi. We got Ahmed and Afrifa at right mid, Schaffelberg, Miller, left mid. You're kind of attacking mid-ish. Your number 8, Osorio, Schwaner, Eustachio, Sigur as your 6s, and then you have David and Larin starting as the strikers. For me, Daniel Oasis is the 3rd striker, and then Theo Baird rounding it off for the team. So we'll switch that up in a little bit. We'll just get into a couple comments here before we build a 4-2-3-1 system and have a little fun with this. Wow, at some of the call-ups, some other guys injured or something. There's 2 main injuries, right, Alex? That I don't know if I'm missing anybody else, but it's Tajon Buchanan, Ismail Kone.
That's pretty much, those are the main injuries.
Those are the main
Everyone
injuries.
else is, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Big one.
Yeah, some just other notable ones for anyone tuning in: Ike Ugbo, Jason Russell-Rowe, Corbiano, Hoylett, Brim, some other guys.
Hoylett's I think might still be injured because he hasn't yet made his debut, unless I missed something this past weekend. So that's another one, I guess, to watch out for in terms of injury.
Okay, I thought so. Yes, I can confirm he hasn't made his debut. I just kind of remember checking the roster and didn't see him there. So okay, so Hoylett might have a bit of an injury, and then a couple kind of surprise ones. Samuel Piet had his spot taken by Niko Sigur, and Luc de Fougerolles, youngster, misses out to Joel Waterman. And Alex, we'll touch quickly, and any of you guys want to touch on it as well, because it is technically breaking news today, officially, that Schwaner has moved to Grasshopper. Do you think that impacts him getting any minutes here at all, Alex? I know you put Osorio in front of him because I don't know if it's just because of style, from what you've seen from Osorio at Copa America, just what you think Marsh prefers. Do you think it has anything to do with the fact that Schwaner was going through this move and has basically sealed it right before going to this window?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the Schwaner move, I mean, that's obviously we'll see how it impacts him, right? Because he obviously hasn't been playing for Montreal either, so we'll see if that's kind of thrown him out of rhythm. Because there's the whole League's Cup break, and then he doesn't play in their return and then finalize. It's like it took a little longer than everyone probably thought. But I guess that's also the gamble that he's taking with this move, is that he's hoping that by going and being an impact contributor, which he should be day one at Grasshopper based on his pedigree and what he brings, then of course we'll see how much that ends up helping him long term, both in terms of his national team and club aspirations. But for now, I guess we'll probably see it, kind of a cautious approach, just because he hasn't played that a whole lot this summer between everything, between Copa America, between coming back and being smacked in League's Cup break and all the rumors. So I think this for Schwaner, he's with this move. This isn't a move for today. I think this is a move that, if all goes well, this is a 2026 move for Schwaner. It's a gamble where, if he lights it up at Grasshopper, he's at an age where, okay, maybe might struggle to break it to a top club, but who knows? Like people go shopping in Switzerland, people go shopping elsewhere, and of course, if he's getting 2,000, 3,000 minutes, if he's getting 5 and 5 in terms of goals and assists, he's playing all over. I'm sure Jesse Marsh will look at him like, okay, maybe I do have to give him some more starts. Right now, no rush.
Two leagues that come to mind for me just quickly, just because I've been asked that quite a bit. Like, he's 25. Like, is this move like to try to get a move somewhere else? Two leagues I would maybe look for would be Belgium is an obvious one to keep an eye on the Swiss league, but also the championship. There's been a bit of a trend of the championship clubs taking a look at players that are starting in Switzerland. So just, some food for thought to keep an eye out there, but he's backing himself. He's moving on from MLS, and you have to respect the player doing so. Jeff also followed up that question by saying, no, guys, build your, I guess, preferred best 11, build the player that, or the team that you want to see. And Jeff was saying that Laren's form is just simply not good enough, and Oluwase or Bear would be better options. So, well, Alex,
I mean, just to that point, while we're there, just because Albert, of course, mentions Laren played great for Mallorca playing wide. I wonder if he had a future in a different position. That's all something I continue to stress and to remember. My opinion, Kyle Laren's best season, it was 2021, 2022, I want to say it was. It was that season it was 2020, 2021. Besiktas did the league and cup double. Kyle Laren scored, I want to say, 21 league goals or whereabouts.
19.
He was 19 league goals. Okay, and it was a couple of more in the big cup games. It was like 24 something all competitions. He played exclusively that season as a left winger. Like, that's something where, to that point about Laren being best when he's not leading the line, he's so good at dropping deep, at kind of combining. Even it was so weird. He's like this huge 6'1" dude playing left wing for Besiktas. Yet he was good with the ball at his feet. He'd link up. He'd make these late runs. He'd kill guys at the back post, right? Because he's 6'1", and you turn around. There's this, you're a 5'11" fullback, and a 6'1" guy's coming in for these late crosses, late runs. That's why I'll continue to say that I just don't see him as an out and out number 9. And I think the reality is, with him and Jonathan David, we know is definitely not an out and out number 9. That has been clear. He can lead the line on his own, and so can Kyle Laren. But a big reason for that is they know how to drop deep. They know how to combine. They just get in each other's way. So yeah, I'd agree that maybe if there was a reality, especially if Canada's got a couple injuries to wingers, Kyle Laren could do a shift for you at left wing. But it's just, I know it's not always conventional soccer knowledge to see a big 6'1" forward best deployed in that sort of area. But hey, sometimes you got to experiment. It can lead to interesting results.
It can. And yeah, that was a sensational season. It was a surprise to every Canadian who watched him at Orlando and how he played, to see him move out wide and then just have this incredible season with Atiba Hutchinson. It was a lot of fun. He hasn't really played there since. And I personally don't think he probably ever will with the men's national team or with the club level. I mean, a few years older, it's not like his speed's going to get any better while he gets into his 30s. So probably won't see it, but it's funny how a certain tweak or trying to play a different position can create something like that season did. It was special, but yeah, we're going to create a starting 11 here in a second. That's probably going to be a little different, but we'll get into a couple questions here. Phil says, Grasshopper got a steal of a deal getting Schwaner. Schwaner could easily play for a mid to top team in the Netherlands or in Belgium. I would tend to agree with that.
I'd say he could. He should at least get a look at that level, or he could get a look at that level. Should's obviously a strong word, but I think he's definitely got the ability to have a chance at that level. I guess for what it's worth, just to throw it out there with the Swiss league, this is why it's the toughest thing I find to rate with these leagues, is that there's a lot of similarity between the top clubs from League 6 all the way down to 30 in the coefficient. Where the gap really gets big is like the bottom half of the Serbian league, the bottom half of the Swedish league, the bottom half of the Swiss league, even the bottom half of the Belgian league. Like, you see some of these team Netherlands as well, like some of the teams at the bottom half of the Eredivisie. You watch some of the games, the levels clearly just, it's not there. But that's kind of why it's hard to rate Schwaner, because Grasshopper isn't traditional, or at least recently haven't been one of the top Swiss teams, but they're kind of in that mix where historically they were usually one of the top 4 teams. Recently, Basel's been a lot, like the last year they've been awful. That's the hardest thing to rate with Schwaner. Like, where Grasshopper a top 3 team this season in Switzerland, you have to remember that's not like that is kind of equivalent to a middle of Netherlands, middle of Belgium, just because there's such difference between the leagues. Just to that point, Belgium is ranked 8th in the UEFA coefficients right now. Netherlands is 6th. Switzerland's down at 60th. It's not that far off in terms of like similarity. Some leagues below Switzerland include Scotland, which we've seen a lot of guys at, Croatia, Sweden. Like, the Switzerland's still at a good level.
It is, and I'm pretty sure, I don't know if you're looking at it right now, Alex, isn't Czechia like pretty high up on that list? I think that was the biggest surprise when I looked at them last time. I thought they were like 7th.
They're 9th.
Ninth. So that was a bit of a surprise for me. And remember,
Norway's up at 11th too.
Okay. So we got Jade Nelson there. Luka Klinovic scored 7 or so goals with I can't remember the club he's at, Slovan Liberec in Czechia. So then he got his move to the Eredivisie. So yeah, I mean, we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see. I said that I would have liked to see a move to a league. Maybe I'm just more comfortable with a following, and I'm a big fan of the Belgian league. I really am. So I thought that would have been a really ideal move for him. I'm a big fan of the Eredivisie too, but I do believe you need to go to one of those top clubs. I think there's more. It's a little bit more spread out in Belgium. There's a lot of clubs that can compete, where the Netherlands, 3, maybe 4 clubs if you don't land. Heavy. Yeah, so that's the reason I like the Belgium league. It's competitive and it's a good league for some young Canadians, and we've seen Promise David go there so far and score a few goals, which is encouraging. But yeah, all right, let's have some fun here. We're gonna make this a 4-2-3-1 system, and Alex, I have one saved from Share My Tactics, so we can play with it a little bit. Alex and I made this, I believe, on our last stream. And now, obviously, Kone is not here. I think we found a starting 11 for Sigur. I guess we also had some fun trying to find a way to get Theo Bair and Jonathan David in together. We talked about how it would change in possession. Sigur would drop in. David would drop in.
Right, this was I think this was the 3-4-2-1 kind of in possession.
Yeah, so like Davies pushed up, Johnston pushed up, Bombito Cornelius opened up Sigur, allowed Eustáquio to push up a little bit along with Kone. Then you had Ahmed and David dropping in there with Theo Bair. So it's the
3-box-3 even, because with Davies and Johnston, that's a term modern coaches love to use, that 3-box-3.
It's a good system. It's one that you see a lot of teams play with. So we have a few players that aren't available. I don't know if you want to do one with Sigur actually playing. I'd
say just too early, right? In the sense that he's injured. If we're talking about this window purely, The beauty of Sigur is he'll be here for a long time, and this window is just about meeting the guys, right? Like, hi, my name's Niko. Nice to meet you, Alfonso, Jonathan, etc. It's about going out in the training field, showing what he's about. And it's about hopefully, if fit, 20 to 30 minutes. Starting that's in October, November, and beyond. Problem.
So let's have some fun then. We need to replace a few players in this team. I'll start.
No,
sorry. I was gonna say, you go.
I guess we can just kind of take out Sigur, Kone, Ahmed, Bear, because I guess those are the 4, and then we can kind of debate. Because I feel like the other 6, if you leave them in, are pretty nailed on, right?
That's where I was. Yeah, the back 4 cryptic. Yeah, there's nothing we need to do with that. Although you could argue with Davies, but I think most Canadians, including myself, would like to see him stay at left back. I don't know if you're changing on that, Alex, or if you want to see him stay down at left back, or if you want to be creative. And I know he said Kubi's not ready, but do you want to see Richie slide in there? For me, I like the back 4. What about you?
Yeah, and I like the back 4, and I mean, I like Johnston out at right back. That was something we were obviously calling for a while before this happened. That's great. Bombito, Cornelius, love the pair. Bombito, it's great what he brings. But don't forget what I'd say about Davies is, like, Canada had a pretty good defensive tournament, Copa America, I'd say, right? Like, that's not unfair to say. Even against Argentina, they only allowed 2 each time when it could have easily been 4 or 5, given their pedigree. Davies at left back played a pretty big role in that throughout the tournament. Like, he, especially against Venezuela, that was his best game by far. He was a machine defensively. Like, don't forget how important Davies is to this system, especially the high line, the speed he brings. Like, it all just works, this back 4, right? You don't kind of want to mess with that.
No, I agree. And I think a lot of Canadian fans kind of, when we watch Alfonso Davies over the years, I mean, he's not a guy who played left back. He'd be playing winger. He'd be playing striker. He'd walk into the midfield. He'd be playing cam. There's some issues sometimes that he would do a little too much. So it was very different watching this tournament when he was restricted to playing left back, doing his role. I thought he had a pretty solid Copa America. I know that, some are like, we expect a little bit more because it's Davies, but you're asking him you take on a lot more responsibility at that left back position to stick to what he knows and not, get himself out of position to get caught. And I thought Davies, as you don't always appreciate a left back, right back. I think he had a very underrated tournament, and I would like to see him stay there. And he complements that back 4 well, like you were saying, Alex. And I really think having the speed beside Cornelius and Bombito on the other side of Cornelius, it works very, very well. So we will keep that, which means that we have Eustachio, and he needs a partner as a defensive midfielder. He can push a little bit higher. I would probably, if we're not going to give it to Sigur because he's brand new and he might have a bit of an injury, I would lean towards Schwaner.
Boom. I was going to say, I was looking to see where you'd go with this, but I think in this Jesse Marsh double pivot and what we've kind of seen from managers who have similar systems, like a Roberto De Zerbi's been using a 4-2-3-1 with Marseille, and of course back at Brighton, which was very similar. Typically, in this double pivot, you got a 6 who can kind of drop back and play between lines and, marshal things. And then you got more of a box-to-box 8 who kind of has freedom to go forward. With what we love, and I think the idea is long-term, is you could see Sigur being that 6, and then we know Eustachio is very good at being that 8, but at the moment, until Sigur is fully fit, there's no Piet in the squad. You keep Eustachio as that 6 because he can also play that role pretty darn good, even though he's obviously very good as an 8. And then I think from that regard, the best box-to-box option with no Kone, I think is a Schwaner. Although, again, Ahmed could earn a bit of a look at that position, but because he's done a good job of it at the Whitecaps, but they've continued to use him out wide. I'd say on that regard, keep an eye on them going forward because they obviously signed a wingback in Ocampo at the Whitecaps. So if they end up playing Ocampo a lot more wingback, that could open up Ahmed in the middle. Until then, I think Schwaner has kind of been the best box-to-box option that's been playing there for club.
I agree. I 100% agree. And I love the energy Schwaner brings as well. We could also argue, though, Alex, depending on how you want to do this, we need a cam. So, I mean, it could be Jonathan David. It could be Ali Ahmed. That means that maybe we have a Schaffelberg and a Miller coming on. Maybe we play somebody out wide, give Jonathan David a go. So I guess my question to you before we build the players with no position is, where do you want to see Ali Ahmed? Do you want to see him out wide? Do you want to put him as a central attacking midfielder? And same goes for David. Is he going to be the lone striker, or do you want to see him drop in or maybe even out wide?
Yeah, I'd say for this system, I like the way Ahmed worked on that like right, because it wasn't like a true wide player. Like he kind of cut in, he made some good passes, some good through balls. He almost combined, but then he also can go out wide and like touch cross, right? He can cover, and I think that kind of suits him with the 10. I just don't know if
Also,
lone 10 is really Ahmed's position. I think Azorio just suits it better, and I think that could be something where if the issue is getting Jonathan David service, I think you look at Schwaner box to box, Azorio the 10, Ahmed out wide, Johnston Davies. Like I feel like this is a setup that gets David that service he's been craving for Canada.
which means David will go up as striker, and then I'm assuming for the last spot we're going to go with Jacob Schaffelberg, and that's what our 4-2-3-1 system could look like. Is that what
Yeah.
you're thinking?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and of course you got Liam Miller as an option too if you want something a bit different. But I like the Schaffelberg. He just brings a bit, speed, direct play, something different. And hey, you can always swap him and Ahmed. I know Ahmed is said when he plays wide he prefers the left. Funnily enough, he's good on the right. He's comfortable on the right, but he prefers the left. You could also mix things up and have a bit of an Ahmed Davies partnership, which I think could be fun to watch down a left-hand side.
A lot of options there. Despite, I mean, we have 23 players on this roster. We could definitely find a bunch of different ways to make it work. Let us know, guys, in the comment section. What do you think about this starting 11? Alex and I have made a few different ones for 4-4-2, 4-2-3-1. There's options. I mean,
Well, I'd say last thing to watch out is for you can also again if you put David at the 10, right? Because Jesse Marsh has tried that, and I think it's worth noting David wasn't bad at the 10. Like he wasn't like out of sorts. Then that could give like the Theo Bear or Tenny Oluwasi a shot, which I think is obviously a look that could be considered. That if Marsh uses two strikers, I'm just dying in general for Canada to see David alongside a target nine and an Oluwasi and Bear. He's got two guys who he could finally have to play off of, right? Someone who can be his Burak Yilmaz that he had at Lille, who just would hold everything up and be a menace, and David would just swoop in underneath and score goals and play a free role. And I do wonder if Jesse Marsh tries that, because remember when David scored against Uruguay, Bear was on the field with him, and they were kind of forming a similar partnership.
so I have a bit to say about the starting 11. I mean, Albert was saying that one big issue with David on his own is he doesn't do much in the air. So Alex kind of corrected that, finding a way to get Theo Bear into this system. And Alex, I mean, it's just kind of funny when you look at it here. So, I mean, guys, watch this. So you have your 4-2-3-1 system, and I'd say the only player who's kind of playing a little out of place is Jonathan David, although he can play in that number 10 role. And when we built that 3-4-2-1, we had him drifting inward anyways. He likes to do that. If you push him up, it just straight up becomes a 4-4-2. You still have your two kind of sixes with Eustachio and Schwaner, your just two wide players. Your two strikers, and it can also become the 4-2-2, the one that Jesse Marsh is well known for. Your two wide players, and so there's a lot of flexibility, a little tweak. It just kind of depends on where Jonathan David is going to play in this system. But I think the big reason that makes this work is getting a player like Theo Bear in there, aerial presence, as you guys mentioned quite a bit, and Alex, like you mentioned, I'm just curious to see how it works. Like a full game starting, seeing if they can build some chemistry together, having Bear, having David there. I mean,
I think what I'll continue to stress. I don't mind Canada trying a two-striker formation. I just think the reality is Kyle Larin and Jonathan David haven't worked together if those are your two strikers. So I'd love to see what Bear and Oluwasi can do. Like what does it give to have, because that's what I've loved about Oluwasi. Like that was the thing that stood out of Copa America. Like he's so relentless. Like some of the runs he makes, like you could tell it makes defenders uncomfortable. He's first off, he's big, he's a big boy, but then he's quick. Like he makes uncomfortable runs. He drifts off your shoulder. He gets in behind, and it opens up space. And I just wonder what David could do with that extra space, because the problem with him playing at 10 wasn't that he wasn't effective at the 10. He was making good moves, good touches. You could see that like there was something working there. There just wasn't that space to operate, right? There wasn't that player to play off of. Him and Larin, again, continue to get in his way. But I do wonder what it could do to have a Bear, to have an Oluwasi, to just offer that threat, because it's tough to defend two strikers, especially like if you're a defender. How do you, because if you mark zone, well, how do you deal with the fact that David's going to drift out of your zone? Like, do you step up and sacrifice your defensive? And if you go man to man, it's a nightmare because David's going to be drifting everywhere. He can pop up in the box. He can pop up in space. You see it for Lille. It's so hard to defend. And I think that could offer a bit more versatility, whereas now what you see a lot of is Lair and David. They're standing together. They're in the same spot. If you're a center back, you're thinking, oh, okay, all I have to do is just step up, limit space. I'm good. I don't have to worry about them getting in behind me. I don't have to worry about them constantly making runs. You kind of have to keep them honest in a sense, and that's this formation offers a bit more in that sense.
So Alex likes to look at this one, and the final thing we're going to do in the stream today is I'm going to put these two comments together here. We're going to build one final starting 11. Jeff was saying that this starting 11 puts a ton of defensive responsibility on Davies. If Schaffelberg is playing at left wing, Schaffelberg is fantastic as an out-and-out winger, but don't expect anything defensively from him. That's kind of where Liam Miller comes in. Now, Liam Miller definitely brings more on the defensive side of the game, and I mean, I've said it quite a few times. A lot of the Canadian fans don't love it when I do. I thought Liam Miller and Alphonso Davies did work well together in that first game. They didn't really play together since that first opening match. And if you want to have a little bit of coverage there, we could play with this a little bit. And then Albert kind of says, yeah, and I like the idea of Schaffelberg maybe moving over to the right-hand side. So we could play with it a little bit here just to try to find a way to get some coverage there. If we think that this is a little bit too open, you could easily, I'm just trying to think of how we could do it. Might have to sacrifice one of these players.
Basically, how I'd look at it, just to note, is that it's also matchup dependent. Because Canada, I thought, did well to have Schaffelberg Davies against Venezuela. But a big reason for that is that Venezuela didn't necessarily have anything egregious in terms of wide threat. Like there wasn't something like, oh, you need to watch out for this. And it worked. Schaffelberg got to play free. He scored. Davies had his best defensive game. He was fine with this matchup. But then, yes, if you're going up against some other teams who have strong wingers, that's where Miller's an option, right? Because he's played wing back. He's defensively responsible. Or, Jeff makes a good point that you can also put another fullback, be it out of Kugby or Larea, and you can also use Davies as a bit of a defensive winger. You can't forget that. That's always a tactical option, that Davies can just be a winger, but while bringing defensive responsibility. And I think ultimately a lot of this is matchup based, the same way that you might use a 4-2-3-1 if another team's stronger in midfield. And this is actually something that I'm kind of wondering long term. And I'll see if there's a way I can kind of ask Jesse Marsh about this, but at least from what I would say, what we keep talking about selecting a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-2-2-2. I wonder if Jesse Marsh is just going to use both. And I think what he can do is they're so similar. You defend the same way. You can just you can match up base, right? Okay, you're going up against strong wingers. Drop in Liam Miller. Drop in a more defensive responsible team. Oh, you're playing a team that's not so good out wide. Put your all-out attack out wide, right? Like get your Schaffelbergs in. Don't worry about defense. Get that sort of formation. Oh, you're playing a team that's lighter in midfield. They like to play like a 4-4-2. Go two in midfield and get two strikers out there. Oh, you're playing a team that's strong in midfield. Let's get the three in the midfield and jam things up. And I think Jesse Marsh with these two formations could be in a position where you can you can slightly adjust based on what you're seeing.
Absolutely. I mean, we're just theorizing around different starting 11s, which is why we saw Liam Miller start against an Argentina. It made more sense. It's always dependent on who you're playing. And I think there's a lot of options here. As Alex just kind of pointed out, there's different ways to approach your opposition depending on what they're going to do, what their strengths are. And we have players that can kind of suit that. And I think having two very different styles of wingers and Jacob Schaffelberg and Liam Miller kind of highlight that, as well as I'm probably not this window, but it can be an opportunity going forward once Adekubi's fully fit to put him in at left back. Even, I guess, Richie Larea. I guess we really could, if we wanted to try that this window, Alex, you could play Richie Larea at left back, Davies going forward. I wasn't crazy about the chemistry because we did see that a little bit at Copa America, Richie going over to left back and Davies pushed up, right? You remember which game that was?
Was it late against?
I can't remember. Was it Chile? Was it? I can't. I remember it didn't work. It didn't look pretty. But
maybe Peru.
Peru? Was it Peru?
No, maybe.
So I think it was Peru or it was Chile. I think it was one of those kind of uglier games. But regardless, we'll have to wait and see. The Jesse Marsh press conference is at 1:00 Eastern time. Alex and I will be there. We will be asking some questions, sharing them on Twitter if you guys want to follow along. Really hope you guys enjoyed our reaction to the September Canadian men's national team roster. This stream was sponsored by our friends at tonybet, so a big shout out to them. And hopefully you guys enjoyed it. There's going to be a lot of content coming up this window, previews, some live streams where we'll be covering the games, the guys in the studio as well. Going to be a lot of fun. So be sure to subscribe for One Soccer if you guys want to follow along, of course. And as always, be sure to drop a like, drop a sub. We'll see you guys soon. Cheers, friends.